This is my Craftsman lawnmower. I've been having some problems with it staying running, and I started spraying some starting fluid, and it seems like it was running fine on starting fluid, so that tells me something's wrong with the carburetor, the fuel system, that's stopping from fuel getting into the engine. So I removed the carburetor, disassemble it, soaked it in some gasoline, and now I'm going to reassemble it. So these are the pieces after cleaning. We have the carburetor body, we have the bowl, and we have the float. Here I have the needle valve in my hand, and I'll explain what that does afterwards. Now this is already an aftermarket carburetor. Somewhere down the line this was replaced. Now there are actually no jets in this carburetor. They're pretty much jets that are kind of pressed in, like passageways that are just kind of set for this lawnmower to run. So there's no like user serviceable jets that I can actually remove. So I just soak the entire body in gasoline for a few hours and then poke some, bristles and old toothbrushes and kind of get in all the passageways and really clean it properly. This thing was completely filthy when I pulled it out. So first thing, we're going to assemble the lower part of the carburetor. This is going to include the carburetor float and the needle valve. I'm going to set the needle valve in the groove on the carburetor float. And it'll just sit right in that little groove over there. Then we're going to drop the needle valve into the fuel inlet on the carburetor. Then there's a little metal retaining pin that we're going to push through these ends. Now you do have to line up the float and all the ends together so the dowel will go straight through. Now there's nothing really holding this dowel in there, you just kind of push it there and kind of set it. When the carburetor bowl is over it, it's going to prevent this from sliding out in either way. Now to demonstrate how this float and this needle valve combination works is I'm going to show you with my mouth. I'm going to blow air in through the fuel inlet. As I raise the float, which is simulating the carb bowl filling up with fuel, you will hear the air stop. This assures that the carburetor will have the proper amount of fuel, not too much where the carb bowl would overflow with fuel, and not too little where the engine would starve for fuel. This is the screw that actually holds the carb bowl onto the carburetor. There's actually a little hole in a passageway on the side of the screw and on the top, so I've also soaked and cleaned this out. Since I don't have a carburetor rebuild kit for this, I'm going to be reusing the old gaskets. So I'm going to take the old carburetor bowl gasket, fit it properly on the edge of the carburetor. Once the gasket's in place, put the carburetor bowl over, make sure it makes a good seal where the gasket surface is, and then put the screw on the bottom of the carburetor bowl. Bottom because this carb's upside down right now. Now this screw doesn't need to be super tight, just snug and a little bit. Now I'm going to take the carburetor and lower it into position. The gasket around the carburetor base is still there, so I'm going to just reuse that. That's fine where it is. I'm actually going to put the screws in the holes before attaching the carburetor. There's limited space here. And then as I'm bringing it in, I'm going to slip the linkage back onto the throttle arm. Just like that. And then just screw the carburetor back on the body. Then I'm just going to finish tightening it up by hand. Now these two screws don't need to be too tight, just snug and just a little bit. Just enough to make the seal. Then just ensure that this throttle arm is working, the cable can pull that, and the return spring is over here. Now that the carburetor's back on, I'm going to fill some gas in the fuel tank and see if it fires. And here's the first start. And there you have it. That's how to assemble a Craftsman carburetor for a push mower.